In the previous video we had this form. Now what we are going to do is a report to consult the information in the table. And that allows us to modify the data that we have already entered. We continue with a fairly simple example only to establish the development bases in Jhanu. Let's remember that in the last video I told you about this connection option. This option is needed to recover the form data for its subsequent update. We are going to use this option. We choose our connection, save. And in the last tab, I choose this option which consists of retrieving the information from this form, using an SQL sequence. What we do is write the statement that allows us to retrieve the record we need. The idea is that the fields that I am specifying here in the SQL statement are called in the same way as how the variables of the form are called. In this way, executing the SQL statements will replace the values of the form variables by the values of the columns with the same name. This last part, where ID equals, is a parameter that will arrive to the form, and here we will specify that it will receive a variable called ID. That will be of integer type. I'm going to add it and hit save. We already have our connection to the database, and the way we are going to retrieve the information. Now we are going to the reports and we add a new report. I am going to put the same title that we had already done. Description. I choose the project and select this option to show me the title of the report. I can omit this part and show me a different title for each component of the report. But we'll do that in another video. I'm going to save it, and when I do, they will be enabled tabs. I go to the Components tab and I'm going to add a new component called SQL Table. And now, what I'm going to do is specify a variable for this table. The report will create a table from an SQL statement. I am going to assign a variable that identifies the table. I can put the same title here, and one of the options is to show me the title for this component. In this case it is the same as the same title of the report. And I configured the report to show the title. That is, I can omit this part. This is just a way to organize the report, but if I want to display it on the screen, I would have to choose this option. What I do now is write the SQL statement. I'm not going to parameters for the SQL statement. We'll see that in another video. I choose the option to create an Excel file, which lists the results and shows me the total of them. I can choose this option so that it paginates every X number of records. I can also hide some columns from the result. I choose the database connection to use. I select the destination of this report. That is, when the report is executed and one of its records is clicked. Where should the system redirect me? I'm going to target a form. And it's going to be the form we made. Now I must write the parameters of that destination. Remember that I had selected ID as the form parameter and the value for this is going to be the ID column, which corresponds to the ID column of the SQL statement. I'm going to save. And leave this option blank, we'll talk about it later. Okay, I have the report ready. I can view the report by clicking here. I can already see it, and now the interesting thing about it is that I have this pencil and when I click on it I return to the form. But so far I am only retrieving the record but I have no way to modify it, and that will be the next task to do. If we want to enable the option to modify or delete the data, we are going to modify the form. To add a new endpoint, that would be to delete the record. And we would modify the save by adding a condition that allows us to know if it is a new record or if it is an existing record. So the first thing we are going to do is modify the endpoint that we already have. We are going to put a condition. We choose the option if, and I am going to move it here. And I'm going to put another action that is else. And I'm going to put it just below. So in the if, what we're going to check is if ID is equal to null. And now within this if we are going to execute the SQL statement. That would be the same one that we have here. At the moment it does not let us drag it to reuse it, so what we are going to do is copy it. Okay, we already have the condition if it is a new record. Now what if this record already exists? I have to add actions to the else. In this case it would be to make another SQL statement. OK. And here it would be an update statement. Then the first would be the new value for the name, which is a string. And the following would be the ID, which would be an integer. We can delete this. Very well. He simply verified that everything is saved and that I am not going to make any mistakes. I think that this would be enough, so we can try again. We go to our report, we reload it. So let's say we're going to change Windows to Windows 10 and I click Save. Apparently it did. I'm going to reload this. And sure enough, there's Windows 10. We've already updated our registry. Now if I wanted to add a new one, I must then enter the form. I could not do it from the report. Because the report is giving me the option to edit, I could only add a button at the top to add a new device type. So we already have the addition ready. If we want to delete a record, we would have to create another endpoint, which we are going to call delete. For that, I'm going to click here on this icon. I click on it and leave it enabled. I am going to configure it. I choose that it is going to receive information from a form, and that the response information is going to be in JSON format using the post method. The option we had, show as a button, this time I am not going to use it. And I press OK. As in the previous endpoint, I must define a connection for it with database. I choose the auto-commit option. I am going to execute an SQL statement. The ID is an integer. I close the connection with the database. I close the connection. And finally that it returns the JSON that it obtains after doing the operation. In input I only need the ID and in output this. The output is only informative. But it serves to have a good collection of swagger. We can see that we now have the endpoints that we need. Here, it only has an ID parameter and if I press, try it out. I only have to write the ID and execute it. Of course we will need the authentication key. OK. This is done. Let's look at our report again. Open our report and we have this. If I enter the form, I see that I only have the save button and there is no delete button. And this is because I didn't configure it as a button but simply left it as an endpoint. Keep in mind that each button is also an endpoint, the only difference is that with that option it would be displayed on a form and this time it won't. We did. So in order to use this service, we have to edit the report again. And here where it says components and I choose the one that says SQL table. And what I'm going to do is use this column definition option. This allows me to modify or add new columns to my report. If I see the report, notice that we only have 3 columns and this column that is here, whose value matches that of the ID column, is really a record counter. I am going to remove that option at this time since it can generate confusion for what we are doing. Let's save and reload again. Note that the record is already there, and something that I had not shown is that when I click on Excel it shows me an Excel file with all the records of the query. My machine takes a while to open Excel, so I'm going to run it and we'll continue the video while it is loading. As I was saying, what I am going to do is add a new column. This column would be number 3. And here what I am going to do is put an HTML label for the new column. We will call it delete. We save it, and when it seems I already have the Excel file that we generated with the query records ready, I am going to reload the form and notice that we have a new column called delete. Now, on this new column I can apply HTML. I am also going to put a spam label and specify that when I click on this option, then a JavaScript function is executed. To specify, put some of the icons that already come by default with the system. I save. I'm going to reload. And notice that I already have this icon that doesn't do anything because if I click here, we get a JavaScript error since we're referencing a function that doesn't exist yet. So to add this function, what I'm going to do is go to the JS tab, and in it I can write free-form JavaScript. Our function is going to call delete. This function is going to receive an object. So now I'm going to reference the table. Jhanu uses a library for jQuery. Called datatable. I save. Here I am making reference to the variable that identifies this table which we had previously defined here. I write these lines to get the data. From the table. This piece of code that I am writing is practically the same always. And I'm going to put an alert to be sure it's the OK record. Let's see how it works. Reload. Here there is an error. It means that I probably missed something in the JavaScript code. However, I think I know what is happening. I'm going to change the name of the method. Save and reload. Perfect was that. I'm going to click here. Nothing is happening, that is, we still have an error. Of course, I have changed the name, but I also have to change it. When called, here. Let's see now. Okay, and there we have number 1. Now this is working. Now what I'm going to do is bind this function to our additional endpoint. We don't want if we enter the report and click delete on a record, the record is deleted. without having some kind of confirmation. So we are going to do two things. The first is to confirm if the user really wants to delete this record, and the second is to link it to the service to delete. So to do the first, there is a library that is integrated. I'm going to comment this out. And I'm going to write the following code. This first function is the one for when we want to delete. And in the next case, when the user decides to cancel the operation. I think that's all. Let's see how it behaves. Okay, that's good. Now what we need is to create our function to delete the information. We are going to enter the ID. That we can put a code. That blocks the screen simulates that the information is being sent. This can be implemented in many ways. I am going to do it using the jQuery library. But it can be done in different ways. Now I have to specify the URL. That I don't know what it is, and we are going to see that now. And what data am I going to enter this? Would be very simple since the endpoint is waiting an ID that corresponds to the ID of my reports. Ready. After this I can put the function in case of success. We will remove the screen lock. And if there is an error, remember that this returns JSON that can contain an error or a success message. Normally the error is in a variable called error within the JSON object, and what we are going to do is verify if that field really exists. And we do it in the following way. so if it exists, show an error message. With our JSON object in its error field and otherwise. Then reload this page. I still don't know what it is, and that's the other option. I'm going to investigate. I know it starts with RP, then it goes with the project ID and the ID the project is 12 example. Okay, then it has to be the ID of this report. To find out the ID of this report, I go to my reports and this field that I have here is the ID. So let's modify this again. And save. I think that this would be complete. Okay, we only need the endpoint URL, and the URL starts with WS, JSON. Follow the project and then the form ID. To know the form ID, I enter the report. Click here and here it is. I think it's this 12 devices. And finally the endpoint name. How do I know what the endpoint name is? I'm going to open my forms in a different tab. I'm going to modify this. I'm going to events and here is delete. Here it is telling me, in fact, which one is. It is telling me, which is the URL I have to contact. 12 devices, delete. Let's see. We save. And go to see our report. There is an error, and surely it is a JavaScript error. I press delete, we cancel it, and now I choose OK. I see that we have not removed that alert. We are missing linking the function that we did. And ready once again we record and test. Okay, well, we are getting closer, although something is still missing. Okay, let's see what is marking us. It is not contacting the endpoint, something is missing. I see that the URL is not complete. We try again. And OK. And it seems that it was deleted, but we made the same mistake. We did not configure in which UI it should refresh. Notice that the record no longer exists. We are going to eliminate the one that says macOS. OK, and finally we already have this, so we can edit. And if I wanted to add a new one, then let's do the following in the components report. We add a new component called HTML, and what we are going to do is simply add a button, and we put this button on top. So all I'm going to do is assign it a variable. And I'm just going to write HTML code. I have to also add something that allows me to capture the event of that button. We already had something similar here with the delete event. OK. Again we have our button, and here we go to our interface. We choose macOS again. We could write a function in JavaScript that cleans us of this form. Every time we enter something, there are several things that we can improve on this form. But we will leave it for a next time. But before finishing this video, there is something that is definitely better to clarify. These URLs are where we put Jhanu in context. This is not a good idea because it could be installed on some application server where it doesn't have Jhanu as context but could be a different context. This would be problematic as if we migrate from an environment where uses this word, the services would stop working since we would be calling the wrong URL. So by default there are already a series of variables that are established and that can be used, one of which will give me the name of the application context, and that variable is called appName. So what I'm going to do is simply do this. And it's the best because if the opposite happened, if we go to an environment where a different context name is used the same, it would still work. Okay, I think that's correct, and now what I'm going to do is try again. Now it's working fine. Perfect. With this we're done this video.